of that speech, and
Sure.
maybe if you want to give us an idea of what.
I mean, let's. The thing is that, you know, just to give some background about my dad, he was a fellow that was born in Yorkshire, England, into a mining community, and they lived in a slum in the 1920s, and they had a horrendous time. There was mass starvation. His family was forced to live in what was basically what in England they call a doss house, which would be a rooming house here. And he had a miserable childhood, and he knew starvation, and he used to dive into dumpsters to eat and all of this stuff. And on top of all of that, healthcare was privatized. Mm-hmm. And he had an older sister who had developed tuberculosis, so that she couldn't get the proper treatments or sanatoriums or all of this stuff. So she just became weaker and weaker, and eventually died from tuberculosis. But she was sent for her final month of life, more or less, to a workhouse infirmary to die, which is just a horrible place to go and die. And the family was, my father's family was so poor that they couldn't afford even a funeral for the child. So she was just dumped into a pauper's pit. So all of those things coalesced as my father's childhood. And he left school at 14, did the regular working life, which was very hand to mouth in the 1930s, and then came the war. He joined the RAF, but he joined it, and this is what we always have to stress, right? Because we hear this every time around Remembrance Day and all of this stuff. People were fighting for democracy. No, my father and most of the working class were fighting for the idea that they would actually get 3 square meals a day. And they were young men, and it was the idea of excitement and all of those things, and leaving what miserable lives they had. The idea that it was actually fighting fascism than actually getting out of town and actually having a life are two different things. And in England, what happened was that they realized that, which is why they had to make agreements that after the war that there would be more of a welfare state. All of that happened. My father was transformed in 1945 by a Labour government, which was socialist. And they brought in 1948 a public health care system, and all of those things transformed his life. And in the 1950s, when Churchill was reelected, he said, "I can't do this anymore. I really got to leave." And my mother and him emigrated to Canada, where, oddly enough, it was private health care then too, because I was actually, even though I was born in 1963, it was still private health care, and they had to pay for the obstetrician. And it's one of those things that all of those things sort of form my dad's viewpoint in life. And even though he became a political activist in his later years, even though he was always political in his early years. And when he turned about 87, my brother died, Peter, and that compelled my father to re-examine his life and all of those things, which is when he started writing about his early life. And we conceived this idea of Harry's Last Stand. And this was that he would be telling that stories about his early life and politics today so that we could make a statement that his past should not become our future. And because of all of that, even though he was a Canadian since the 1960s and had lived in this country since 1953, he went back to the UK because he was invited to speak, and he gave a speech at the 2014 Labour Party conference about healthcare, and all he did was tell people about his early life, and it touched a chord, because at that point in time, and with all left-wing parties, what happens is, and all political parties to a great degree, but more so with left-wing parties, sometimes we lose our way. Sometimes we lose why we are there. And it is not to talk to the middle. It is to energize and revolutionize the people that can bring us back into power, which are the working class, the struggling, those that remember the hard times. And everybody pretty well remembers the hard times. We just like to deny it. And because of all of those things, my father became front and center in that election campaign. Unfortunately, it wasn't won. But because of all of that, in that time period between 2014, And 2019, when he died, he wrote 5 books. And actually 2010 and 2019, he wrote 5 books. And they became the basis of his philosophy and his belief that the only way that we can survive the 21st century is through socialism and left-wing politics.